Get the latest weather, traffic, and news updates online at 560theanswer.com. Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan Proft here. Revisiting our update from earlier in the program on the Minnesota Annunciation Catholic School church shooting from last week. What we have learned about, at least from Andy No's reporting, about mom and dad of the shooter, and that perhaps dad was more of the enabler of the shooter's descent into evil, really, than mom. Mom seemed to be resistant to the official transitioning of identifying as a female, her son identifying as a female. But reportedly, according to Andy No's source, under pressure from family, friends, ideological medical professionals, she relented. And even in the shooter's manifesto, you had a reference to him saying, Mom, you were right, but you handled it wrong, and that's why I want to kill all these people. Not putting that on Mom, but just saying the shooter acknowledged that she was resistant, she did it anyway, and he regretted it, which he said in his manifesto. He also regretted his experimentation with weed, interestingly. But, of course, all that is lost on the political left, both locally and nationally. Jacob Fry is the pajama boy guy from Obamacare who turned out to become the mayor of Minneapolis. At least he looks like him. The genuflecting before George Floyd's casket and sobbing because Minneapolis lost such a great denizen in George Floyd. Talk about performative. Of course, he had this to say last week in reaction to the death and destruction caused by this shooter.
I have heard about a whole lot of hate that's being directed at our trans community. Anybody who is using this as an opportunity to villainize our trans community or any other community out there has lost their sense of common humanity.
Nobody villainizing a community. No, we have some questions, though. Is that okay?
And I want all of you just to know exactly where we are as far as our neighbors go. Minneapolis will continue to be a safe haven for undocumented immigrants, for our trans community. Regardless of who you are or where you come from, Minneapolis is a place where you should be proud to call home.
That was pre-shooting, the trans safe haven kind of lingo, which just means we're going to ignore any pronouncements from the federal government about quote-unquote gender-affirming care or Title IX until they did. And, you wonder if the idea that a trans, like other coalition groups by identity within their movement are magical people that you're not allowed to ask questions, much less make assertions or uncomfortable observations. And so maybe this is part of why, despite his prolific manifesto online and classmates of his from the school he went to a decade ago after Annunciation, who said he was, basically disturbing and would walk around praising Hitler. This is a seventh grade classmate of his. Maybe that's why they were ignored. And we still don't have a full accounting of his high school years. We still don't have a full accounting of the two police incidents that occurred when he was staying with his mom in a Minneapolis suburb. For more on all this, pleased to be joined by John Hinderaker, who is president of the Center for the American Experiment, contributor of PowerlineBlog.com, and a Minnesotan. John, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, glad to be with you, Dan.
So how is the political leadership and the response from the Jacob Frys of the world being received in the larger Minneapolis community?
Well, probably pretty positively. You know, on the night when there was a legitimate funeral at Annunciation Church for these two kids that were murdered, and of course many others injured, the DFL leadership, the entire leadership of the DFL party, almost, including Jacob Fry, but Ilhan Omar and many others, Keith Ellison, Amy Klobuchar, they all attended a so-called vigil in a nearby park. And it was a political rally, reminiscent. If you remember the Wellstone funeral, whatever year that was, remember that? It had turned into a political rally and it horrified people all around the country. Well, this is very much like that, and the whole thing was about gun control. You know, it wasn't about mental health. It wasn't about the trans issue, where apparently by amazing coincidence, you know, one of these mass shooters after another turns out to be caught up in this whole trans thing. But it was not about that. It was 100% about gun control. And Tim Walz is now talking about calling a special session of the legislature sometime this fall to try to ban so-called assault rifles. Semi-automatic rifles like the AR-15 platform and others. So the Democrats in Minnesota certainly see this as a political opportunity.
I saw on your blog, too, not just a political opportunity, but a fundraising opportunity.
Yeah, it's great. So Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez says, hey, we shouldn't be pointing fingers about this shooting. Well, the Minnesota DFL House Caucus sent out a mailing to, I don't know, their whole list, whatever that is, the heading of which is, it's time to ban assault weapons. And it says, we need your signature today to put pressure on Minnesota Republicans who may refuse to take action even now, right? Even now. And so there's boxes you can check to give various amounts of money. And up to $75 if you contribute to the DFL House Caucus will be reimbursed by the state of Minnesota. So not only are they making this just appalling fundraising plea, but they're being subsidized by us taxpayers in doing so.
And just in picking up what you were alluding to with respect to trans, as we saw in the aftermath of this, much like in the aftermath of the Covenant school shooting in Nashville, the biggest crime here would be anybody who misgenders someone or anybody who does not properly express their allyship with whatever constitutes the trans community.
That's exactly right. And, of course, one of the ironies here, Dan, you've probably commented on it already, but this guy, crazy as he was, and he was completely insane, he did say, I know I'm not a woman, which shows a certain amount of self-awareness and apparently more awareness than most of these liberals have.
And has there been any new information locally about police interviewing mom or dad? I know there's been, you heard me mentioning at the outset, some initial focus on mom because she lawyered up and appeared to have fled to Naples, but I believe she's back. And some of the reporting by like Andy No suggests that actually she was pretty conservative and she had worked at the school for 5 years, and maybe dad was more of the enabler to some of this to some of this lunacy.
Now, Dan, I could have missed it because, to be honest, I don't read the Minnesota Star Tribune anymore. I just don't find it to be a useful news source. So maybe they've had some reporting here. I doubt it. I think Andy No is probably the cutting edge, but the lack of curiosity about the mental illness, about the trans thing, about how a guy this patently nuts could have gone this long. In the 2023 legislative session, the Democrats had full control, House, Senate, and Governor, and they did anything they could dream of. They went to their wish list they've had for 20 years, passed all kinds of stuff. One thing they did not try to pass was a ban on so-called assault weapons. What they did pass in 2023 was a red flag law, right? And a red flag law is when a person is mentally ill or has become mentally ill or going through some kind of a crisis, and he owns firearms. He may own them legally. That's the assumption behind the red flag law. But someone who knows him, a family member, whatever it might be, can contact law enforcement. They can get a judicial order, and a deputy sheriff or somebody will go to his house and confiscate his firearms. Now, how often it actually works that way, I don't know. But this is exactly the kind of case for which a red flag law is designed. And yet, obviously, in this case, it didn't work. And so now they're talking about having a special session to do something they could have done in 2023, but made a political decision not to do.
And I mean, the appetite, I know Minneapolis is over the edge, but the appetite in the rest of the state is very different as per how competitive the distribution power in your state legislature is. And I just wonder, very much like when Dems had all three branches of government under Obama and they didn't move to resuscitate the assault weapon ban, they know better. It's not worth the political risk. It wasn't worth the political risk nationally, and maybe it's not worth the political risk at the statewide level because of the rest of the Minnesota outside the Twin Cities.
We'll see. Historically, gun control has not been a winning issue for the Democrats, and they've kind of walked away from it in recent years. The Democrats in Minnesota could be in trouble. Tim Walz is up for re-election if he decides to run in 2026. He may not choose to run for a third term. His record is absolutely terrible. In 2022, everybody thought that the Republicans were going to have a big year in Minnesota, but the Democrats succeeded in making that election a referendum on abortion. Every ad they ran, every single one was on abortion. And they succeeded. They made that election a referendum on abortion, and they narrowly clung to power. And so it seems like what they have in mind here, and they haven't pulled the trigger yet. They're talking about it. But it seems like what they have in mind is to do a repeat of 2022 and to try to just dodge all of the issues, public safety, the economy, education, and so on, where they're really in trouble by turning the 2026 election into a referendum on gun control. Will that work? I don't know, but I will say this: it is better for them than running on Tim Walz's record.
Yeah. The intra-movement fighting between Jacob Fry and Omar Fatah, they're still learning how to do democracy, apparently. The DFL, they had an endorsement of Fatah, Ilhan Omar's Somali ally, that was rescinded. Where does that stand in terms of the future leadership of Minneapolis?
Well, the same thing happened in 2021. People forget this. Fatah is a democratic socialist, as they call themselves, extremely far left, currently a member of the Minnesota House, I believe. But the same thing happened in 2021. That is, a socialist got the endorsement for mayor, but Jacob Fry won the election. They have ranked choice voting in Minneapolis, and so it makes it kind of hard to predict. My guess, unless and until something different happens, my guess is that Jacob Fry will pull out this election because, the handful of Republicans who still live in Minneapolis, along with the relatively moderate Democrats, are going to vote for him.
Yeah, and not to mention, I saw at some event he has practiced enough Somali to get by at events for the Somali community there. So he's able to pander to all segments of the Minneapolis city population.
Well, like Tim Walz, Jacob Fry's record is terrible. If you look at what's happened in Minneapolis since he became mayor, it is a long downward spiral. I think we mentioned on this show, Dan, that there was a nice new office building in the heart of downtown Minneapolis that sold, I think, in 2017 or 18, for $200 million. And about 5 or 6 months ago, it sold for $6 million, a 97% decline in value of that, nice piece of commercial real estate. So that tax base is going up in smoke, the commercial tax base, and they're now putting massive increases onto residential property taxes in Minneapolis. And, how a guy runs for election on that kind of record is a mystery, but for the fact that the alternatives are all worse.
And on public safety, where we were having this conversation about D.C. and now Chicago and to some extent Baltimore, Minneapolis still down a bunch of officers from the summer of love, the George Floyd summer, like so many of these other urban police departments.
Oh, absolutely. At one point, there was a court order directing them to hire more officers. There's a city charter requirement that they are well below, but they couldn't do it. They tried. They not too surprisingly couldn't do it. And Minneapolis is just like Chicago and Washington, other cities. The Democrats who run the city say crime is down. Crime is down. Well, yeah, it's down a little bit since the peak of, say, 2021. There was this huge spike in 2020 and 2021, and since then it has drifted downward a little bit, but nowhere near the level that it was at, before those incidents in 2020.
John Hinderaker, President and Center of the American Experiment, and contributor to Powerline, powerlineblog.com. John, thank you as always.
Great to be with you, Dan.
John Hinderaker joined us on the Turnkey.pro answer line.
The stories you need to know to start your day. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Having a safety plan is essential. God forbid someone breaks into your home, or if you find yourself in a confrontation, don't